One of the most encouraging things about going to the new Kearney Center for Emergency Services for homeless people is the army of interns that you find there. I usually attend a weekly lunchtime meeting of churches and agencies that work with people experiencing homelessness. The first thing we do in these meetings is we all introduce ourselves. The pastors and the social workers who have been at this for a long time pull themselves out of their seats and give their name, rank, and serial number. But the interns, they spring up as though there were attack in their seats, and they bubble with enthusiasm. They crackle with optimism that they can help their clients. It's just wonderful. There are some drawbacks, however, to interns. Interns pay attention. I remember this from the days when Megan Thorvalson was our intern here at the church one summer. Interns pay attention. They notice the difference between your your practice in theory, and then your actual theory that's being applied in your ministry. They watch your body languages. They listen to your prayers. I used to be an intern myself, and from my supervisor, I learned many bad habits which I declared I would never follow myself. I'm sure that Megan, when she was an intern, before she became a medical intern at the Mayo Clinic, saw the same things around here. It occurs to me that her experience as an intern in this congregation convinced her to go to medical school instead. A couple of weeks ago, we read in Mark's Gospel how Jesus dispatched 12 interns to go and do what they had seen him do. They preached, they taught, they healed, and apparently they did a pretty good job. And in today's reading from Mark's Gospel, the interns return to their supervisor and make their report. The apostles gathered around Jesus, says Mark, and told them all that they had done and taught. I wonder what method Jesus used to evaluate his interns' performance. I think the interns were lucky to have lived before the days of video cameras and standardized tests. Imagine the pressure taking the apostolic FCAT. The very notion of having Jesus as your supervisor is scary enough. I know that when I report to him every day, I hope he is grading on the curve. So when all the reports are in, Jesus does not order the apostles to gather in breakout groups and facilitate self-reflection. Instead, he proposes a vacation. Come away to a deserted place all by yourselves and rest a while, he says. Not try harder next time, not write out your personal goals for the next 6 months, not even well done, pat yourselves on the back. No, come away to a deserted place, all by yourselves. No cell phone connection, no Wi-Fi, no personal planner to remind you of the appointments you have ahead. Away. Rest. And one gets the feeling from Mark that it's not just the apostles that Jesus is concerned about. Mark hints they were all feeling the pressure of their work bringing in God's kingdom. For many were coming and going, and they had no leisure even to eat. When you work that hard, day in and day out, something's wrong, something's out of kilter. It's time to come away and rest. Now, does any of this sound familiar to you? No leisure, even to eat. The breakfast burrito bought at the drive-thru has become the mainstay in many American diets. Add to that the drink guzzled down instead of the leisurely cup of coffee or glass of orange juice, and you have a recipe for a gastronomical and spiritual train wreck. Out of every dollar spent on food, the average American spends 49 cents on food eaten outside the home. Americans, why do they do this? Well, because they have no leisure, no time to eat at home, no time to cook, no time to think, no time to come away to a deserted place and rest. Americans work harder than almost everyone else in the so-called developed world. The French work 28% fewer hours per person than Americans. Germans 25% fewer. On the average, Americans get 13 days of vacation per year. Brits get 28 days. Germans 35, French 37, and Italians 42 days of vacation per year. Back in 1967, the futurist Herman Kahn predicted that by the end of the 20th century, Americans would enjoy 13 weeks of vacation and a 4-day work week. The challenge, he predicted, would be trying to figure out what to do with all our free time. Despite all the extra hours of work, Americans are not necessarily more productive than Europeans. Productivity-wise, we're about the same. Here's the difference. Europeans use their productivity for more leisure. Americans use ours to create more wealth. And we are wealthier. If by wealth you mean we have a higher GDP and more money to buy goods and services we feel we must have. Basically, we work more hours to pay for the things we can't do for ourselves because we're working more hours. Things like cooking and cleaning and taking care of the garden and taking care of our children. All this extra work creates plenty of jobs in the service sector, but it's not making people who work at those jobs necessarily wealthy. A person working at the current rate, the minimum wage of $7.25, makes about $15,000 a year if they could work every day full time. That's about $7,000 lower than the poverty rate for a family of 4. The current minimum wage was set by Congress in 2009. There was an attempt last year to raise it to $10.25 an hour, but that failed in the House of Representatives. President Obama did, by executive order, require $10.25 for workers in service contracts, future federal service contracts. But even at that higher rate, lots of people have to work more than one job in order to make ends meet. Out on the campaign trail last week, Governor Jeb Bush told a New Hampshire newspaper, and I quote, "Workforce participation has to rise from its all-time modern lows. It means that people need to work longer hours and, through their productivity, gain more income for their families." That's what he said, but then his campaign aide said that's not what he meant. Listen, I know that feeling completely. What he meant was companies are limiting employees to 30 hours per week in order not to give them health insurance under the Affordable Care Act. In other words, we're working fewer hours, but it's Obamacare's fault. The status quo is not likely to change until Christians begin to make different choices, until our lives reflect the priorities of God's kingdom and not just the priorities of the culture. We need fair wages. And we also need to reconsider why and how we work. The trouble with the rat race, said Lily Tomlin famously, is that even if you win, you're still a rat. Most Presbyterians have inherited a Puritan work ethic. We know it's good to work hard for the glory of God. What we forget sometimes is that work itself can become a kind of idol. My own father was the hardest working pastor I ever knew, but after he retired, he advised me not to follow his example. He said, looking back, I went to too many committee meetings. Why, I wonder, do we take with such seriousness Jesus' commands to feed the hungry, house the homeless, befriend the outcast, but ignore his command to come away to a deserted place and rest? Perhaps it's because we don't trust God to be God. We don't really believe in God the Father Almighty. We believe in God the well-intentioned but poorly organized philanthropist who would never make it without our constant help. If nothing else, this passage from Mark is a divine command to slow down, smell the roses, keep some kind of Sabbath. For many of us, the pace of work is not only unhealthy, it's unchristian. But this passage does not end with Jesus and the disciples hanging out around the beach, passing around a bottle of sunscreen. Even Jesus' best laid plans to take it easy run headfirst into the deep longing for the kingdom that he is bringing in. Jesus and his interns get into a boat bound for that deserted place. And when they get there, there's an even bigger crowd waiting for them. Jesus sighs. Literally, he is moved in his gut. These people won't leave him alone because they have nowhere else to turn. They are like sheep without a shepherd, says Mark. So Jesus postpones that break, goes right back to work. He teaches the crowd and even performs another miracle, the feeding of the 5,000. Then he gets in the boat and goes to Gentile territory. Sure there'll be R&R space there, but no, he gets to Gennesaret and it's the same story all over again. No matter where he goes, the sheep cry for a shepherd. Actually, to be very frank with you, I'm not sure what to do with this text. On the one hand, it invites us to go with Jesus to that deserted place where there are no distractions, that place where we can be refreshed and renewed. On the other hand, it leads us right back into the fray. To hungry people who need to be fed, to anxious people who need to be comforted, to broken people who need to be healed. Jesus does not rescind his invitation to come away and rest, neither does he turn his back on sheep without a shepherd. There's a tension in this text, and I cannot resolve it. Perhaps we're not meant to. This text reads a lot like life to me. Rest is holy, and God knows we need it, but work can be holy too. We were created for both, and while both can bring us closer to God, both can also become idols who would like nothing more than to take the place of God. Another term for disciple is intern for life. When we interns gather around our supervisor to make our report, we can be confident he will listen carefully and judge us with compassion. He sees how exhausted we are from trying to bring the kingdom in all by ourselves, from doing what mere interns should not attempt. Take a break, he says. You can't do it by yourselves. Come away and rest. But don't break out the sunscreen too soon. There might be a lost sheep on the way to that deserted place. This much is sure: Jesus will not abandon us to our own devices and desires. The Good Shepherd knows his sheep, and the sheep know him, and he will not let them go. Amen.